The ongoing war in Ukraine has already passed the 4-year mark. And what actually makes it into the news is really just the surface. Deep beneath the surface of the news headlines, there are things that the United Nations, international courts, and independent investigators have documented with specific names, precise numbers, and exact dates. Confirmed massacres, entire cities turned into cemeteries, soldiers being sent off to die like disposable pieces. Absolutely nothing in this video is just a simple rumor. Every single case has serious sources behind it. So brace yourself, because some of these facts will absolutely never leave your mind. Welcome to yet another video from the History in Focus channel. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video so that you do not miss any more videos like this one.
Fact number 1, drones now account for up to 8 out of every 10 deaths on this battlefield. A device that cost the equivalent of $1,000 began doing the work that used to belong to heavy artillery and tanks. It takes off, finds a soldier alone, and flies straight into his body until it explodes. The pilot sees everything in real time through a camera, seated in a shelter on the other side of the line. The war stopped being about cannons and became an individual hunt, one man chasing another through a screen. These drones are called FPV, short for first-person view. The operator puts on goggles that receive the image from the front camera and pilots as if inside the device, flying close to the ground. In 2025 alone, according to the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense, the country's pilots killed or seriously wounded more than 240,000 Russian soldiers in nearly 820,000 attacks recorded on video. Russia does exactly the same on its side. Every single one of those casualties has a recording stored somewhere. The result is a strip of land where nothing moves without being hunted. This lethal zone now extends roughly 12 miles behind the front line, and Ukraine is already working to stretch that range to about 60 miles. A tank, a truck, an ambulance, a soldier on foot, everything becomes a target inside it the moment it leaves cover. The no man's land between the trenches has become a void nobody crosses by day without accepting the risk of not coming back to tell the story. The sky becomes a constant threat. To escape signal jamming, both sides began using drones connected by a fiber optic wire with spools carrying up to about 30 miles of cable. There is no radio to interfere with, no way to detect by frequency, no jammer that works. The device comes in low and silent, trailing the thin wire behind it, and no electronic warfare equipment can bring it down. It is the cheapest technology of the war, blocking exactly what the most expensive cannot stop. And the worst part is that those same drones became the greatest threat to people who are not soldiers. In January of 2025, they killed more civilians in Ukraine than missiles, more than artillery, hitting people inside cars, at bus stops, and walking down the street. Most of these attacks on civilians happened in Ukrainian-controlled territory, from the Russian side of the crosshairs. The hunter who sees everything through the camera stopped distinguishing the uniform from the ordinary resident and kills both the same. Fact number 2, Russia turned its own soldiers into disposable meat. The tactic was born in the battle for the city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine, which lasted 224 days, and was compared to the muddy trenches of World War I. The idea is simple and brutal. Send one wave of infantry after another against the enemy position until the defender's machine gun jams from firing so much or runs out of ammunition. The soldiers stopped being a life and became just a number to be spent. The men sent in those waves rarely received real training. They went forward knowing the chance of coming back was slim, just to force the defender to reveal his position and burn through his ammunition. The Ukrainian defense minister estimated Russian casualties in the battle for Bakhmut at around 70,000 people. A city that before the war had 70,000 residents was reduced to rubble to capture a point that the analysts themselves considered of little strategic value on the map. What alarmed the analysts was not the tactic itself, but the fact that it became official, standard practice. After Bakhmut, the entire Russian army began forming assault groups for exactly this purpose, spending men in exchange for advances. Every large unit organizes these waves of expendable infantry as a normal part of combat routine, village by village. It is not the desperation of a lone commander in a bad moment. It is routine across the entire war front. In the end, the math is cold as ice. Russia accepts losing people en masse because it calculates that it has more people to lose than Ukraine can replace. It is the logic of attrition taken to the limit, where the life of a soldier is worth less than a few hundred yards of scorched and burned earth. Whoever sends the wave knows half will not return and sends them anyway, because the goal was never to save those who go first. It was just to spend enough people to punch through the other side's line. Fact number 3. Gas returned to the trenches a century after World War I. The international organization that monitors chemical weapons, the OPCW, confirmed finding CS gas, a tear gas banned as a method of warfare, in samples collected from a trench on the front line in Ukraine. It was the first time the use of such an agent was proven in an active combat zone in the country. The analysis was performed by 2 separate laboratories, which reached the same conclusion. The United States and the United Kingdom accuse Russia of also using chloropicrin, a choking agent that Germany first employed in World War I. It burns the lungs, the eyes, and the skin, and can cause vomiting and even edema that kills from the inside. The American accusation is direct about the motive. The objective is to force the Ukrainian soldier out of the fortified position where he is protected, leaving his body exposed for the attack with conventional weapons immediately after. Ukraine says it has documented more than 6,000 cases of munitions containing dangerous chemicals between early 2023 and early 2025. Most arrive by grenade dropped from a drone directly into the trench on top of the cornered soldier. The government's tally points to a quantity that grew at an accelerated pace in the latest period, with hundreds of uses concentrated in just a few months. The number is far too high to be an accident or to be treated as an isolated case. For a soldier trapped in a trench without a mask, the choice is inhumane. Either he runs outside and exposes himself to the enemy fire waiting there, or he stays put and risks suffocating inside his own hole. At least 1 Ukrainian soldier died choking on the gas, and more than 500 required medical treatment. 100 years after the gas masks of World War I, humanity found the same cowardly way once again to kill people cornered in a hole in the ground. Fact number 4. When the Russians retreated from Bucha, the streets were covered in bodies. The city is near Kiev, the capital, and was occupied in the first weeks of the invasion in early 2022. When Russian troops finally left and investigators entered, they found more than 450 bodies scattered throughout the city, almost all showing signs of violent death. These were not people who fell in combat with a weapon in hand. They were ordinary people executed in the middle of their daily routines. The victims were killed doing ordinary things, walking down the street, going to get food, riding a bicycle home. Many had their hands tied behind their backs and a point-blank gunshot to the head, a clear mark of execution, not a firefight. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International documented dozens of these cases with witnesses and forensic evidence. Bucha had about 36,000 residents before the war. In a matter of weeks, the entire city became a crime scene from start to finish. Ukrainian investigators managed to identify the Russian unit responsible for part of the killings, an air assault regiment, by matching the bullets recovered from the bodies with the weapons used by that specific group. In the neighboring city of Borodyanka, airstrikes brought down entire residential blocks and killed at least 40 civilians, leaving thousands without homes. The pattern repeated itself in every place the Russians left, defeated and in a hurry to erase their tracks. Months later, in the city of Izium in eastern Ukraine, the story repeated itself on an even larger scale. When Ukrainian forces retook the area, they found a mass grave with more than 440 bodies buried in the woods. Many showed signs of torture, mutilation, broken bones, and gunshots to the head. Some had their hands bound, exactly like in Bucha. The forest at the edge of the city hid rows of shallow graves, each marked only with a number on a crooked wooden cross. What connects Bucha and Izium is not coincidence. It is method. Wherever Russian troops occupied and then lost the ground, the same scene was always left behind. Executed civilians, hidden mass graves, bodies bearing the marks of torture everywhere. Russia denies everything and calls it a production staged by the West. But the forensic evidence, the witnesses, and the satellite images tell a different version, and that version has names, locations, and body counts. Fact number 5. Nearly every prisoner who returns from Russian captivity returns tortured. According to the UN, approximately 95% of Ukrainian prisoners of war underwent systematic torture at the hands of their captors during their time in custody. The accounts repeat themselves with a similarity that is frightening: beatings, electric shocks, stress positions maintained for hours, mock executions with a gun to the head. The UN interviewed hundreds of released individuals and heard the same structure of account every time, with the same methods. The testimonies match one another even when coming from different prisons, from different and distant regions, which points to a pattern coming from above, not to isolated abuse in one place. One of the UN commissions concluded that torture had become a common and accepted practice, applied with a clear sense of impunity. Those in charge knew nobody would answer for it afterward. Sexual violence enters this picture as a tool of torture, and it primarily affects detained men. The accounts gathered by the UN include electric shocks applied directly to the genitals, repeated multiple times during interrogations. The UN classified this type of practice as a crime against humanity, precisely because of the frequency and the organized manner in which it appears. The objective was never to obtain real information. It was to break the person from the inside and mark them forever. During the occupation, sexual violence also reached civilians, particularly women in homes and villages. In the Kherson region, the UN documented rapes committed by Russian soldiers against women between 19 and 83 years of age. In many cases, family members were kept in the room next door, forced to hear everything without being able to do anything to stop it. The violence came accompanied by beatings, strangulation, and a shot fired beside the victim's head just to increase the terror. There were cases where the torture was so brutal the person died right there, on the cell floor. At a detention center set up inside a school, a man began feeling ill shortly after being tortured, and the Russians denied him any medical aid. He died in less than an hour in front of the other prisoners. As of February 2026, Russia still held approximately 7,000 Ukrainians in custody, both soldiers and civilians. Every one of them is a name waiting to return from a place like that. Fact number 6. In the middle of the night, an entire dam exploded and swept dozens of villages away with the water. It happened in June of 2023 at the Kakhovka Dam on the Dnipro River in southern Ukraine. Seismic sensors installed in Ukraine and Romania recorded the signal of a detonation around 3 in the morning, in the dark. Shortly after, an enormous volume of water burst through the structure and rushed downriver in a single wall, swallowing houses and entire towns downstream. The dam was in Russian-occupied territory at the time. Investigations indicate that Russian troops probably placed the explosives to flood the area and disrupt a Ukrainian offensive expected in that region. The Kremlin denies having done it. The death toll came out distorted from the beginning. Russia reported 59 drowned, but health workers in the city of Oleshki spoke of hundreds in that one place alone, with shallow graves hastily dug for the bodies. The damage went far beyond the immediate deaths from the floodwaters. Approximately 100,000 people had to be evacuated or were left homeless across an area comparable in size to a small country. The damage exceeded $4 billion in the first estimate alone, and close to 1 million people lost access to drinking water because the reservoir that supplied the entire region simply emptied out. A decision made in the dark dried up the taps hundreds of miles away. Along with the water, poison flowed down the river. More than 150 tons of oil leaked from the power plant into the water, added to what came out of gas stations, factories, and flooded sewers, all of it flowing toward the Black Sea. Experts began discussing whether the case constitutes ecocide, which is the deliberate mass destruction of an ecosystem. The war found there a way to kill not only the people who lived nearby, but the entire river for decades. Fact number 7. Ukraine became the most mined country on the entire planet. Since the 2022 invasion, mines and unexploded ordnance have spread across about 23% of the territory, an area comparable in size to the American state of Florida. There are millions of mines buried in the ground, left by both sides along the entire combat front. The UN says the country now faces a level of explosive contamination that Europe had not seen since the end of World War II. The problem does not disappear when the war actually stops. Clearing all of it should take decades and cost close to $35 billion according to UN-linked estimates. Every yard of field needs to be swept by hand, slowly, with the risk alongside every step. Meanwhile, the land is useless for planting, and in a country that is one of the world's largest wheat producers, that turns into hunger abroad too, in distant countries that depended on that harvest. The ones who die most because of the mines are not soldiers, they are ordinary people. In 2024 alone, mines and war remnants killed or wounded 6,279 people in the country, and approximately 90% of them were civilians with no connection to the fighting. Nearly half of those victims were children. These are people who step on the wrong spot walking home, or children who find a strange object in the bushes and pick it up just to see what it is. The weapon stays armed in the ground long after whoever placed it has already gone. The cruelest part of all is that a mine can sit for months, years, until someone finally steps on it. The farmer who returns to his own land after the war does not know whether the half that is left for him to use is safe or not. The rancher sweeps what he can, plants, and prays he does not find what was buried there. The war ends on signed paper, but it stays very much alive beneath the feet of anyone trying to restart their life. Fact number 8. Every winter, Russia tries to shut off the power and heating of an entire country. The tactic repeats itself every cold season since the start of the war, always in the same way. Coordinated mass attacks against power plants, substations, and energy lines spread across Ukraine. The target is not the Ukrainian army. It is the grid that keeps millions of civilians warm when outside it is many degrees below zero. The idea is clear: freeze the population to break the will to resist. The numbers from a single attack already show the scale of it. In one strike in January of 2026, approximately 800,000 customers lost electricity and heating all at once, right at the peak of winter cold. Entire regions went into total blackout, in complete darkness. And Russia does not only target the power plant itself, it also targets the repair crews who go to fix the damage. So the repairs take even longer and the darkness lasts longer over the battered city. Leaving a city without power in the middle of winter is not collateral damage, it is the plan from the start. Without electricity, there is no heating, and without heating, there is no way to survive the night at a temperature that freezes and kills. Hospitals run on generators. Buildings turn to ice on the inside. Elderly people face mortal danger. Russia repeats this year after year, knowing exactly what it does and what it causes. The cold becomes a weapon, and the bill for it is paid by people who never picked up a rifle in their entire lives. Fact number 9. Mariupol entered the war with 450,000 residents and came out as a cemetery. The port city in southern Ukraine was encircled in the first weeks of the invasion and endured nearly 3 full months of bombardment between early and mid-2022. The population trapped inside the siege went without electricity, without water, without heating, and without food, and had to bury their own dead on the roadside in the backyard because they could not reach the cemetery under fire. The death toll of Mariupol was never truly finalized and perhaps never will be. Human Rights Watch analyzed satellite images of the city's cemeteries and calculated at least 8,000 deaths above normal in the first year alone. It made a point of saying that this is the floor, probably well below the real count. Estimates from the Ukrainian government and from journalists who were inside range from 22,000 to as many as 87,000 dead. The physical destruction matched the human one, building by building. Approximately 90% of the city's buildings were damaged, and 40% of them were completely destroyed, reduced to piles of concrete. Hospitals, schools, factories, everything became smoking rubble. Those who managed to leave by car described the view from the bus window as passing through a city burned and blackened from start to finish. 350,000 people were forced to abandon the place where they had built their lives. To hide the scale of the killing, the city's mayor accused Russia of bringing mobile crematoriums into Mariupol. These were trucks with furnaces inside, used to burn the bodies and destroy the evidence before anyone from outside could count how many there were. The Russians also allegedly refused entry to humanitarian convoys, leaving the population trapped and without any aid. The fewer bodies that remain to be counted, the lower the number the world sees. That was exactly the calculation. Bodies were still being pulled from the rubble nearly an entire year after the siege ended. Today, the city is under Russian occupation, rebuilt on the outside to look normal, with most of the evidence already wiped from the map. The true number of Mariupol's dead was buried along with the old city, beneath the new and clean concrete. Those who died there became part of a tally that Russia worked hard to make sure nobody could ever truly close. Fact number 10. Russia emptied its own prisons to send murderers to the war front. The one who did this was the Wagner Group, a private military company that fought for Russia, led by a man named Yevgeny Prigozhin. He personally toured the country's prisons recruiting inmates, including people convicted of rape and murder. The offer was direct and simple. Fight in Ukraine in exchange for a full pardon of the sentence. All you had to do was survive to walk out free. The inmates were used exactly as disposable parts on the front line. They went at the head of the assault waves, burning through ammunition and revealing the enemy's position so that the more experienced and trained Wagner fighters could come right behind. It worked to capture Bakhmut, the city that became the meat grinder of the entire war. As an assault force that is simply thrown away, the untrained inmate proved effective. In the coldest, most cruel meaning of the word, the human cost of all this was tallied only afterward, calmly. An investigation cross-referenced records and found more than 19,500 Wagner fighters killed in the battle for Bakhmut alone, and of those, 17,000 were ex-convicts recruited from prison, and nearly a third of all the inmates recruited by the group ended up dead. Prigozhin himself, who had also done time in prison in his youth, admitted to having lost more than 20,000 men in that single battle. In the end, the math was predictable for whoever was doing the calculating. The inmate was worth less than the regular soldier, and the regular soldier was already worth very little in that war. Sending an untrained convict across open ground under fire was not a miscalculation. It was exactly the calculation from the start. The promised freedom was always on the other side of a crossing that almost nobody completed alive. Prigozhin died 2 months after taking Bakhmut on a plane that crashed near Moscow. Fact number 11. Russia imported North Korean soldiers and spent them as cannon fodder. At the end of 2024, between 11 and 12,000 North Korean military personnel were sent to the Russian region of Kursk to help push back Ukrainian troops that had invaded that piece of Russian territory. They were described as special operations soldiers, the best trained troops in their entire country. And they were used as foot infantry on the front line, in the most exposed manner possible. They were not remotely prepared for the kind of war they found there. They advanced across open ground without knowing how to deal with the drones that dominated the sky at all times, and became easy targets for the Ukrainians. In just 3 months, they lost approximately 40% of the entire contingent that had been sent. An American think tank calculated an average of roughly 92 casualties per day among the North Koreans at the height of combat. They were elite soldiers thrown into a grinder nobody had prepared them for. British intelligence estimated that more than 6,000 North Korean soldiers were killed in Kursk, more than half of everything that had been sent there. The losses almost certainly came from those large-scale infantry assaults, with people thrown again and again against the same defended position. North Korea itself, sometime later, went so far as to blame Russia for the heavy losses at the start of the operation in internal reports that were shown on the country's state television. And there was still the lie told back home to the families. The relatives of the soldiers sent were informed that they were merely on military exercises, not in a real war on the other side of the world. Those who died became a silence. No body to bury, and no explanation whatsoever, far from anyone who could ask. Two countries used those men as bargaining chips between each other, and the life of each one of them was worth what a part sent to be spent is worth. Fact number 12. The Russians bombed a theater with the word children written on the ground. It happened in Mariupol in March of 2022, in the middle of the siege of the city. Hundreds of civilians were sheltering inside the municipal theater, fleeing the bombardment that would not stop outside. To try to prevent the attack, someone painted on the ground, in front of and behind the building, the word children in Russian, in letters so large they could be read from high in the sky and even by satellite. The Russian Air Force attacked the building anyway. An investigation by the American news agency The Associated Press reconstructed the attack with survivors and building blueprints, and estimated that approximately 600 people died inside. It is the single deadliest attack on civilians in the entire war to date. The people were in the basement of the theater, at the point that seemed safest after weeks of brutal siege. The warning painted on the asphalt, visible from above, did not stop the bomb from landing exactly on top of where the children were hiding. A few days earlier, in the same city of Mariupol, another attack had already destroyed a maternity ward and a children's hospital together. The image of a wounded pregnant woman being carried on a stretcher through the rubble traveled the entire world in those days. She and the baby she was carrying did not survive the injuries. The doctors performed an emergency cesarean, but neither the mother nor the child survived in the end. The photo became one of the symbols of the invasion, and behind it were two lives that ended together. 2 years later, in July of 2024, a Russian missile struck Akhmedit, the largest children's hospital in all of Ukraine and the capital Kyiv. At the exact moment of the attack, there were 627 young patients inside that building. It was a center that treated some of the sickest children in the country, including severe cases of cancer and kidney dialysis. The small patients had to be rushed out and treated right there on the street, sitting on benches, outside what was left of the building. Hospital, maternity ward, theater full of children. All three cases carry the same signature. The place where the most defenseless person seeks shelter becomes precisely the point that receives the bomb. Deliberately bombing children is the ceiling of cruelty in a war. And here, it did not happen just once. It was a pattern that repeated over the course of years. Russia denies having intentionally targeted these places, but the craters blown open in the buildings tell a very different story from the official version. Fact number 13. Russia dug up Soviet-era bombs and simply strapped wings onto them. These are the so-called glide bombs. The idea was to take old heavy bombs, the kind that had been sitting in depots gathering dust since the Soviet era, and attach to them a cheap kit with wings and a simple guidance system. With that, the Russian jet releases the bomb from far away, out of reach of Ukrainian air defenses, and the bomb glides on its own to the chosen target. The great danger of these bombs lies in the size of the payload each one carries. Each unit concentrates hundreds of pounds of explosive in a single impact against the ground. It is not a precision missile that hits a window. It is an enormous weight that falls and devastates everything in a wide radius around it. A single one of these bombs wipes out an entire fortified position, or brings down a multi-story building all at once. And since it comes from far away, it gives very little warning time for anyone below to run. What makes the weapon so difficult to counter is the distance from which it launches. The Russian jet does not even need to enter the airspace where Ukrainian defenses can reach and bring it down. It drops the bomb miles from the target and turns around calmly while the weight glides on its own toward the destination ahead. It is old technology, decades old, transformed with a cheap accessory into one of the most destructive tools on the front. The past came back with wings and falls on city and trench alike. Fact number 14. More than 15,000 civilians have already died in this war, and the real number is higher. That is the count the UN has managed to confirm, one by one, name by name, through April of 2026. There are more than 15,800 civilian deaths in total, and the UN itself makes a point of warning that the real number is much higher than that. There are deaths not yet verified in occupied areas where the investigators cannot even enter to properly count what happened inside during the occupation. The pace of civilian killing did not slow with the passage of time. It only got worse. The year 2025 was the deadliest for civilians since the start of the invasion, with more than 2,500 killed in that 12-month period alone. This is not a battlefield count between soldiers. These are people struck at home, at work, walking down the street, far from the front line. The UN summed up the situation like this. Today, being in Ukraine, anywhere in the country, already means running the real risk of dying because of the war. There's a detail in those numbers that says a lot about who is left behind when the bomb falls. Among the civilians killed near the front line, more than 45% were people aged 60 or older, even though the elderly make up only about a quarter of the country's population. They are precisely the ones who had nowhere to go, or who did not want to abandon the house where they had always lived, and ended up staying in the frontline villages while everything collapsed around them. Fact number 15. A single missile fell on a funeral and killed a sixth of the entire village. It happened in the village of Hroza in eastern Ukraine in October of 2023. The residents were all gathered inside a cafe for a funeral, actually the burial of a soldier from that same region. A missile struck the place packed with mourners. 59 people died at once in that cafe, 36 women, 22 men, and a boy of just 8 years old who was there with his family. The village of Hroza had approximately 100 residents in total. A single attack killed roughly a sixth of the entire population in one blow. The UN investigated the case and concluded there was no military target inside the cafe or around it. They were civilians at a funeral, and absolutely nothing there justified that strike. Entire families, spanning several generations, were erased in the same second. A little more than a year earlier, at the start of 2022, another attack had already shown the same total disregard for civilians. At the Kramatorsk train station, more than 500 people were waiting there to flee the war, at a point that everyone on both sides knew was an evacuation center. A missile loaded with cluster munitions exploded right over the crowd and killed at least 58 civilians on the spot. Cluster munitions are a weapon designed specifically to scatter dozens of small bombs over a large area at once. Precisely the kind of thing you do not use where civilians are gathered in a crowd. And it was used right there, in the exact place and at the exact time when the largest number of ordinary people were assembled and packed together trying to flee the country. Cases like these accumulate throughout the war. In January of 2023, a heavy missile struck a residential building in the city of Dnipro and killed at least 46 people, including 6 small children. A funeral, a train station, an apartment building full of families. What unites all 3 cases is not the randomness of a stray bomb that missed its target. It is the clear pattern of hitting the point where civilians gather in groups. Any one of them alone would be a tragedy. Together, they form a method. Fact number 16. Soldiers who surrendered were shot on the very spot where they dropped their weapons. The UN documented an alarming increase in executions of Ukrainian prisoners of war by Russian forces in recent times. By the end of 2025, the confirmed number had reached at least 337 prisoners deliberately executed. These are soldiers who had already surrendered, unarmed, hands in the air, offering no resistance, killed in cold blood instead of simply being captured. A large portion of these cases have video or photographic evidence published by both sides of the war, showing either the execution itself or the bodies afterward. Between late August of 2024 and early 2025 alone, the UN counted 79 executions across 24 separate and distinct incidents. Many soldiers were shot at the exact instant they surrendered, at the very spot where they raised their hands. The geographic pattern of the cases shows it happened precisely where Russia was advancing on the offensive. The UN noted a detail that helps explain why this number has risen so sharply. Public figures inside Russia began openly calling for the execution of Ukrainian prisoners in press interviews and on social media. When an authority speaks like that in public, and there is already a broad amnesty law ready to cover the crime. The soldier in the field understands he can shoot the surrendered man without answering for it later. The order did not even need to be written. The message just had to come from above. The most well-known case happened in Olenivka in July of 2022. An explosion at a prison in occupied territory killed at least 53 prisoners, most of them from the Azov regiment, captured in Mariupol and awaiting a prisoner exchange. Russia blamed a Ukrainian rocket for the explosion, but a UN report completely rejected that version. Ukraine treats the case as a mass execution. Those who surrender should be protected by law. There, surrendering became a sentence. Fact number 17. No major power has lost this many people in a war since 1945. That is what the CSS, an American think tank, indicates when calculating the military casualties of this war. Between February of 2022 and the end of 2025, Russia is estimated to have suffered nearly 1.2 million total casualties, killed, wounded, and missing in the field. Of those, somewhere between 275,000 and 325,000 are believed to be soldiers killed. No major power had seen numbers like these since World War II. Ukraine, with a much smaller army and population, also paid an enormous price. The same study estimates between 500,000 and 600,000 Ukrainian casualties in that period, with somewhere between 100,000 and 140,000 soldiers killed. Adding both sides of the war together, total casualties may approach 2 million people by the spring of 2026. These are people killed, wounded, or simply vanished, a tally that grows every month that passes. The pace of 2025 alone shows the scale of this attrition. In that single year, Russia is estimated to have suffered approximately 415,000 casualties, an average of close to 35,000 men per month, and all of it for tiny advances measured in yards on the map, village by village, house by house. The Russian strategy deliberately accepts this gigantic cost, betting that it has more people to lose and that Ukraine will be exhausted first. What all these numbers truly say is that the war has become a machine for grinding people. Hundreds of thousands dead on both sides combine to move a line on the map that barely shifts from one year to the next. Every yard of conquered ground cost a number of lives that no major power had agreed to pay since the greatest war in all of human history. And the bill remains open, adding names with each passing day, while the map itself barely changes color when all is said and done. Fact number 18, Russia counted its own dead one single time and then never again. The last time the Russian government released an official number of soldiers killed was back in September of 2022, still early in the invasion. On that occasion, it admitted just over 6,000 total dead. Since then, absolute silence on the subject. While independent estimates abroad speak of hundreds of thousands dead, the number Russia shows its own people froze in time, locked back there. To manage to keep this entire count hidden, a conveniently bureaucratic trick emerged. Starting in mid-2024, Russian military units began filing mass petitions to officially declare as dead the soldiers who were merely missing. By the end of 2025, there were already approximately 90,000 such petitions in the queue. It is a way of removing the dead from the public statistics, transforming what would be a confirmed casualty into a simple missing person. The contrast with the other side of the war is enormous. In Ukraine, anonymous volunteers maintain an open and public database with tens of thousands of killed soldiers already identified by full name. In Russia, the official number remains that same handful of thousands from 2022, frozen in time forever. Hiding your own dead is a government choice, and that choice says a great deal. Fact number 19. Russia took thousands of Ukrainian children and scattered them across its own territory. Since the start of the invasion, children living in occupied areas were removed and transferred into Russia. Some of these children were war orphans, others were simply separated from their parents in the middle of the chaos. They were held in 43 camps spread across the entire country, including 2 of them deep in Siberia, far from everything they knew and from anyone who could come for them. What makes this case even more serious is the objective that existed behind everything. The children went through a process that the Russian official in charge of the program openly called integration. The idea behind it was to erase their Ukrainian identity, to make them forget where they came from, and gradually begin to see themselves as truly Russian. Some were handed over to Russian families, distributed across dozens of different regions of the country, many thousands of miles from home. All of this ended up producing a truly historic decision. In March of 2023, the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin personally and also against the Russian official responsible for this transfer of children. It was the first warrant in history issued against the leader of a country that is a permanent member of the UN Security Council. The charge is direct and severe: deportation and illegal transfer of children forcibly taken from occupied territory. Taking a child, erasing where they came from, and teaching them to call their homeland the very country that destroyed their home is the kind of crime that does not fit inside a number. There is no way to measure how many of these children will grow up not knowing their real name, their mother tongue, their true origin. War kills people with bombs and kills people with hunger every day. But here, it found a far quieter way to kill, stealing childhood and rewriting who that child would one day have been.